Thank you.
Well, welcome everyone to the SUNY Historians Network webinar series in U.S. history. And this is organized by the SUNY History Lab, which is based at SUNY Brockport and is a venue for bringing together historians and those interested in historical inquiry across the SUNY system and connecting SUNY out to citizens of New York State and beyond as well. I'm one of the co-directors of the SUNY History Lab, Michael Kramer, and I'm a historian at SUNY Brockport. Just a bit of housekeeping before we turn to a talk I've been looking forward to today from Dr. April Masten from SUNY Stony Brook. We generally use the Q&A function instead of the chat function. You're welcome to post a question in the Q&A section. After Dr. Masten's talk, I will invite you to unmute your microphone and you can ask your question, or if you prefer, just indicate that you would like me to read your question. We have two webinars coming up in the spring 2025 semester, and those are on February 5th, Wednesday from 5 to 7 p.m. Dr. E. Howard Ashford of the Department of History at SUNY Oneonta will be presenting a talk, Reframing African American History in the Post-Civil War Era. And then 1 month later, on the 5th of March, 2025, also a Wednesday from 5 to 7 p.m., Sheila Curran Bernard of the Department of History at SUNY Albany will be presenting a talk about her new book, and the talk is called Challenging the Lead Belly Mythology, from her book titled Bring Judgment Day, Reclaiming Lead Belly's Truths from Jim Crow's Lies. Today, we're delighted to get to listen to a talk from another new book by a SUNY historian, a book that's coming out in 2025 titled Diamond and Juba, Partners in Time, forthcoming from the University of Illinois Press. And it's been written by Dr. April Masten, who is a professor of history at Stony Brook University. She specializes in the labor history of the arts, and her first book, Artwork, was published by the University of Pennsylvania Press in 2008. It explored the surprisingly egalitarian cultural landscape of mid-19th century New York, where thousands of young women, aided by radical artisans and editors, managed to study the visual arts and become professional artists. Dr. Masten has published essays on the overlooked artistic contributions of artist models, genre painter Lily Martin Spencer, the pitfalls of interdisciplinary scholarship, a rich topic, challenge dancing, and the joys of teaching history through dance. In 2021 and 22, she received awards from the American Historical Association, and she received SUNY Chancellor for Excellence in Teaching for her innovative seminar, in which students learn to ring shout, jig, waltz, and swing to complement their archival study of the people, places, and periods that produce these dances. As I mentioned, her book, which this talk is connected to, is forthcoming in the coming year, Diamond and Juba, Partners in Time. And we're so delighted to have Dr. Masten here today to present her work. Over to you, Dr. Masten.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy to be here. Let's see, I'm just going to check to see who I'm looking at here. I'm just looking at myself. Okay, so I am actually going to begin by thanking Michael Kramer for inviting me to the Fall 2024 SUNY Historians Network webinar series in U.S. history to present my work on the labor history of dance. And my talk today will draw from my book, Diamond and Juba, which has been retitled, thanks to friends and my publisher, The Raucous World of 19th Century Challenge Dancing, although it does still talk about partners in time. And as you said, that's forthcoming with the University of Illinois Press in fall 2025. So Diamond and Juba tells the story of these two extraordinary jig dancers, Irish-American John Diamond and African-American William Henry Lane, also known as Juba, who achieved international fame in the mid-19th century as competitors in the art and sport of challenge dancing. The book takes this celebrated rivalry as its subject in order to rescue challenge dancing from its ill deserved obscurity and shed new light on multiple facets of 19th century society, including the experience of poor urban laborers, the multiracial, cross gender origins of American popular culture, children's labor, masculinity, and the porous and generative social interaction of free Black and immigrant white people in the tumultuous years before the Civil War. Challenge dancing, I argue, was more than an occasional leisure activity for the urban masses. It was a recognized sport, a form of remunerative labor, and a means of upward mobility for the truly talented, despite the disadvantages of their race, class, gender, or generation. Its popularity among the working classes made exceptional jig dancers like Diamond and Juba marketable theatrical attractions who were recruited by stage and circus impresarios. Challenge dancing was also a betting sport that shared much in common with boxing as a manly art that involved gambling and champion belts, but also featured women competitors, cross dressing, and blackface. In the end, the story of these two challenge dancers can tell us much about social relations in the mid 19th century, about shifting structures of opportunity, and about the role of physical talent in determining individual destinies. So today's webinar, Great Public Contest, demonstrates the sort of work that went into writing this book. Not only did it take over 15 years of research to reconstruct the careers of these two working class dancers, it also entailed reading deeply and widely about anything or anywhere their story took me, which to my horror included boxing and blackface, but also took me to really exciting places like theaters, garden saloons, into child labor, into circus life, all those kinds of things. That wide vista was necessary because the topic of my study is a popular dance, and those are extremely hard. It's an extremely hard art form to recreate from the sources available in a pre-photography, pre-film era. Overcoming this methodological challenge required collecting a diverse array of text-based, visual, and kinesthetic sources, and drawing on my training in historical, archival, and aesthetic fields to analyze and interpret those sources. Because neither of my dancers left behind a written record, I had to look far and wide for references to them and to their art form, to analyze close to 100 contemporary prints, and to try to dance their dances. In other words, it took a long time and a lot of effort to recover, reconstruct, and give meaning to the lives and labors of these working class dancers and the changing society in which they danced. So that's the book. And here's my paper, Great Public Contest, the Black Irish Sport of Antebellum Challenge Dancing. Oops, I'm gonna get that to change. There we go. On Sunday, July 7th, 1844, the New York Herald announced that a great public contest between the two most renowned dancers in the world, the original John Diamond and the colored boy Juba, would be danced for a wager of $200 on Monday evening, July 8th, at the Bowery Amphitheater. The opponents in this match and the dances they would perform were produced by cultural exchange and competition between Black and Irish Americans. Contrary to what most literature on the 19th century American culture suggests, this contest was not an instance of a one-sided cultural appropriation. The original John Diamond was a 20-year-old Irish American who had been dancing, quote, Negro jigs and jig dance matches on stage for 5 years. He is called the original because many impersonators used his name to attract audiences. The colored boy Juba was an 18-year-old African American named William Henry Lane, who had been dancing Negro jigs and jig dance matches on stage for 3 years as Master Rattler and as Master Diamond before adopting Juba as his stage name. Both dancers grew up and gained reputations as jig dancers in New York City's lower class Sixth Ward. Both began their dancing careers at 8 years old, working in dockside taverns. Both danced in blackface makeup for P.T. Barnum in the early 1840s, and both were dancing for blackface minstrel troupes when this contest, this great public contest, was organized. During the first half of the 19th century, countless working class men, women, and children faced off in dancing competitions for pleasure, prestige, and profit. They honed their skills and made their names in local taverns and dance houses, on city streets, and at public markets. Professional jig dancers built careers working theater circuits and touring with circuses and minstrel troupes, and champion dancers enhanced their reputations by making challenges and winning scored bouts for hefty purses, side bets, and valuable prizes. The popularity of this sport, as evidenced by the frequency of notices in the papers and descriptions of packed houses at dancing matches, makes challenge dancing a window onto the daily lives of us people in the 1840s. This window is three things. First, the prevalence of sociable interaction between Black and Irish Americans, the little known noted participation of women in competitive entertainments, and the changing social and economic forces that turned an inclusive game into a masculine sport. Among those forces were the diverse and mostly poor people who migrated to American cities, and also acquisitive capitalists like Barnum and other theatrical managers who commercialized their culture. And that happens during the speculative frenzy that accompanied America's market revolution. So this webinar illuminates that history by doing a close reading of this advertisement for a great public contest between Diamond and Juba, the two most celebrated jig and breakdown dancers of the era. Let's see. Challenge dancing was a creolized or mixed form of Irish partner dancing produced by pervasive Black Irish social interaction. That interaction, which began with the enslavement of African people, took place both under duress and voluntarily on sea and on land, in farming country and in great metropolises. But it flourished most strikingly in the seaport and riverfront cities of Jacksonian America, where, according to one observer, lower class whites and blacks mixed together like whortleberries and cream. And this is a picture of Callowhill Street Market on the Delaware River, right next to the ferry docks. And as you can see, there are men and women, Black and white people, sailors, animals. It's a place where people mixed. Shared geography like this brought Irish and Black people into contact. In the early 19th century, Irish immigrants settled in the poorest neighborhoods of American towns and cities, where the highest population of free African Americans lived. Those populations rose in New York, where the great public contest was held after 1827, when the British government repealed all restrictions on Irish immigration and enslaved Black Americans were officially emancipated, although not always liberated, but that was their official emancipation in New York. By the 1840s, their numbers were close to equal, with approximately 18,000 alien Irish and 14,000 African Americans. Young people seeking employment dominated both of these populations, with single Irish women actually outnumbering the Irish men. The impoverished denizens of these unsegregated neighborhoods rubbed shoulders in the streets, drank and danced in the same public houses, rented rooms in the same buildings, and even intermarried, usually one of those Irish women with an African American man. Their shared locality and social mingling supported the cultural borrowing that resulted in the shared language of jig dancing, which made challenge dancing common to all. Practiced in parts of West Africa and in Ireland, competitive dancing formed a bridge between these populations. Most scholarship on 19th century Black Irish relations focuses on those Irish immigrants who set out to become American by making common cause with whiteness. They dropped their Irish cultural practices, they rejected any association with their Black neighbors, and they accepted the notion that those below them, not those above them, were responsible for their distress. These people did not engage in challenge dancing, but other Irish people did. And those Irish people were often identified by their betters as amalgamators destined for poverty, criminality, and prostitution. Challenge dancing embodied both the tension between both exchange and competition. Always there's exchange, always there's competition that characterized Black Irish interactions in early American cities, where race relations were more fluid and situational than has been acknowledged. Challenge dancers performed what were called Negro jigs, and that's a term that in the 1800s referred to a style of dancing associated with lower class Black and Irish Americans. Jigs were lively step dances with British and European origins. However, in the United States, people use the terms jig dancing and Negro dancing interchangeably to refer to the same dances. Those dances derived from the lively jigs, reels, and hornpipes of Irish set dancing and the rhythmic footwork, hip play, and upper body movements of African dance practices. Often called breakdowns by contemporaries, dancing challenges took place at the end of each set. So, set dancing is a set of tunes, so three tunes put together, and you dance to each of those tunes. So the dancing challenges come at the end of a set, or they come sometimes at the end of the night of dancing. And in fact, if you I'm going to talk about this relationship between boxing and challenge dancing, but the boxing term set two actually comes from set dancing challenges. The man and woman in a couple like this one might compete against each other, or they might challenge another couple, or they might break up and dance in single sex competitions. The winner of a dancing match was the couple or the person, the best dancer or sometimes the archest wag, in other words, the funniest dancer, who held out the longest while performing the greatest variety of steps. So each step is actually 16 measures of music, and they would have to perform it on both the right foot and the left foot, the same steps. That encourages borrowing not only from rival jig dancers, but also from other dance genres, so you would have enough movements. These matches were called cake dances in Ireland and eel dances in the northern parts of the US for the prizes that were awarded. And they were held inside taverns and dance houses for drinks and wagers, and out in the streets like this child dancing here, and on market squares for food, for small change. And this was an amusement, but because of this kind of remuneration, money and food and stuff, it was also a way to contribute to a lower class family's economy. The visiting English novelist Charles Dickens recorded this mixed practice in his 1842 description of the colored boy Juba, our guy, dancing in an African American tavern in Five Points, New York. That's New York City's actually notorious slum. Dickens was familiar with the format of these dances. He'd seen set dancing before. It's a very popular dance in Ireland and England, that kind of dancing. But the style of the steps was new. This is what he wrote, quote, "Every gentleman sets as long as he likes to the opposite lady, and the opposite lady to him." So you've heard the word set there. They set, so that's from Irish set dancing. "And all are so long about it that the sport begins to languish." Well, we know that the challenges come at the end of the set or at the end of the night, so they're languishing, too much dancing. "When suddenly the lively hero dashes to the rescue, single shuffle, double shuffle, cut and cross cut," those are Irish steps, "snapping his fingers, rolling his eyes, turning in his knees, those are African moves, spinning about on his toes and heels, a la ballet, when, having danced his partner off her feet and himself too, he finishes by leaping gloriously on the bar counter and calling for something to drink. This dance was an African American rendition of an Irish set dance. Dickens's hero was not performing solo. He and his female partner were in competition. And you can see here, this is actually a drawing that was published in Dickens's book, American Notes, that he wrote the scene in. And you can see that the author, I mean, the artist has put the woman and man, the two couples dancing together there. So the two partners, the male and female, they're in competition, and then the competition had rules, and these came out kind of in that description, but also in our description of the Great Public Contest. So he won the match by demonstrating his skill and wit in combining both Irish crosscuts and African turned in knees, and he's combining those into complicated steps performed on the right and left foot, and by exceeding his partner's time on the floor. And that in our advertisement is called the best time and the greatest number of steps. He also expects a reward at the end of this dance. He jumps on the bar counter, he calls for a free drink because that's going to be his reward. Now, this world of challenge dancing is revealed in the details of this Great Public Contest advertisement. Daily papers like the New York Herald were designed and priced to attract readers from the lower classes. Accordingly, the terms of the match were specified in the ad. These are terms that people would be familiar with. So the two contestants were going to meet and dance, and this is down here. They're going to meet and dance 3 jigs, 2 reels, and the Camptown hornpipe. And 5 judges, so 5 men, are going to be selected for their ability and knowledge of the art. So they're going to adjudicate, and you're having that particular men do it because you're going to get a fair decision will be made. The rules affecting the judge, so those are the terms. Now, the rules affecting the judging are right below there, and they're also laid out. Each dancer will select his own violin, and the victory will be decided by the best time and the greatest number of steps. Now, anyone who attended or danced at these kinds of events would have known what these terms and rules meant. Jigs, reels, and hornpipes were the tune changes in an Irish set dance. Judges with ability and knowledge were dancers themselves, and violins or fiddles were the customary accompaniment at private competitions. Now, the venue announced also connects this match to this Black Irish context and practice. According to the Herald, you can see up at the top there, the Bowery Amphitheater had been expressly chosen for the match as its accommodation will afford all a fair view of each step of these wonderful dancers. So at tavern matches, the spectators come in close and they watch, they follow the dancers' feet, and then they take part in the judging by cheering or applauding their favorite and then assessing the judge's choice, all of which makes a clear view of the stage important on July 8th. Those people that come to the Bowery Amphitheater want to be able to watch those steps. Everybody watches, everybody listens, and they count the dancer's steps. They count any missteps or breaks with the rhythm, which explains why each dancer brought his violinist with him. Choosing the right fiddler could win the match for the dancer, whose speed and accuracy depended on the musician's ability to anticipate his moves. Good dancers did not just follow the music, they embellished it with their rhythms. They played a duet with the musician. Nor did good musicians just keep time for the dancer. They responded to the steps, inserting rhythmic and melodic passages of their own. Dancers and fiddlers learned from and influenced each other's art. They also challenged each other to contests, to matches. So, like the choice of the Bowery Amphitheater, the low price of admission, and that's down at the bottom there, indicates that these dancers were anticipating an enormous and diverse crowd. So on this occasion, you're going to have the box seats are 25 cents. The pit seats are 12 and a half cents. That's 1 shilling at the time. So after the financial panic of 1837, most theaters lowered their prices and admitted anyone who could pay for a ticket. So the 25-cent box seats at Diamond and Juba's match would have been filled with patrons from the middling classes, like small business owners, clerks, and their guests. And the shilling tickets, those 12 and a half cent tickets, those were actually within reach of most lower class workers. Theaters and amphitheaters also sometimes advertised that places would be set aside or set apart for colored persons. In other words, the blacks and whites would sit separately, but the Herald did not specify segregation, suggesting that the cheaper pit seats or the pit seat occupants would be mixed. Diamond and Juba expected to fill the Bowery Amphitheater because of something cultural theorist Pierre Bourdieu calls imaginary participation based on past experience of real practice. In other words, challenge dancing's audiences were mostly made up of men and women who danced Negro jigs themselves. Quote, the excitement was great and glorious at a match dance for $50 a side between Joe Miles and John Daniels at the Franklin Theater, reported the New York Sporting Whip. Women as well as male bipeds enjoyed the sport with a relish keen and delightful. Women dancers participated in the sport. That's fuels their delight. They want to go watch this because they actually dance. But that idea, this participation, was also nipped in the bud when challenge dancing went out of the tavern and was commercialized. The speculation that drove the market revolution encouraged the development of commercial entertainment, which can be described as you take this truly popular cultural practice, change it slightly, and then sell it back to the people as spectacle. The betting and gambling associated with jig dancing was also a real selling point. So, aided by the newly founded popular press, papers like the Herald and the Whip, businessmen like P.T. Barnum monetized and masculinized challenge dancing. They trolled wharfs like this one, wharfside districts, looking for working class amusements to sell. And they saw men, women, and children set dancing, enjoying themselves dancing. So they hired popular boy dancers like this one, published exaggerated challenges under their stage names, and presented them blacked up in mock competitions or gag competitions. And in those, the dancing was real, but the wagers were fakes, thereby padding only the manager's purse. Now, this is a image of the play, 1848 play New York as It Is. This is the set, the stage setting, but what you can see they're showing here, this is a street scene that would go on anywhere on the docks in New York, and now they've put it right into a play. So that's one way of repackaging cultural practices, sort of popular practices, and turning it into spectacle. In this case, it just became part of a play. Both Diamond and Juba earned wages and garnered their fame by dancing those gag matches. Juba even danced them as Master Diamond. However, their female rivals did not make the cut, mostly due to the rising middle class conception of appropriate behavior for women and girls. There is quite a lot of scattered evidence that young women did dance challenges in public in the 1840s, but the scanty and often sexist description of them, usually they were described as prostitutes, those descriptions and publications makes it quite easy to just ignore their contributions to the sport. Male champions like Diamond and Juba had learned and practiced their skills dancing sets against their female partners. They also appropriated the movements of women who danced professionally, By doing that, by dancing like women danced on stage, they could add to the thrill or the humorous effect of their performances. So Juba, for instance, added toe dancing and pirouettes to his champion steps. He imitates ballerinas when he does that, with whom he shared the stage. And young male dancers, they would win praise and they could win matches with these kind of stolen moves, but only vulgar female dancers competed like men on stage. Entertainment managers who reaped the benefit of theatrical performances felt no qualms about presenting fake master diamonds or gag matches. But working class dancers and their fans knew the difference between wages and wagers. That is why the ad specified that the building had been, quote, expressly hired for this night only. It told the public that this match was not the part of a regular program being presented at the Bowery Amphitheater. There's a circus there, then there's blackface shows there. Not part of that program. This is a standalone sporting event which the spectators would need to buy a separate ticket for. And this separation distinguished the match from blackface minstrelsy act. It also made it an example of cross-racial competition, as opposed to like a racialized performance. Here are two people of different races competing, and those kind of competitions became increasingly rare over the course of the 1840s. Challenge dancing was clearly informed and ultimately co-opted by blackface minstrelsy. But the two really should not be conflated. The origins of challenge dancing in mixed race communities distinguished it from other blackface entertainments. When minstrel troupes, like this one here, they were bands of singer musicians who performed, quote, Negro songs, comedic skits in blackface. When these emerged as a distinct genre in the 1843, they depended on champion dancers to draw them a crowd. And jig dancers exploited the employment opportunities that they offered. Quote, without the champion jig dancers, this is minstrel manager Frank Dumont speaking, the minstrel show was a ship without a rudder. He was the star of the troupe. If he signified his intention of quitting the show, the entire troupe would beg him on bended knees not to leave them to their fate. This need enabled star dancers like Diamond and Juba to demand high salaries and pursue autonomous careers. They could just move from one minstrel troupe to another, one theater, one circus to another. At the time that their match took place, Diamond was working for John Tryon's equestrian circus at the Bowery Amphitheater in conjunction with a troupe of blackface minstrels who called themselves Virginia Serenaders. Juba was working in the concert saloon on Chambers Street, where the ad says you can buy tickets, with a band of black and white musicians who also called themselves Virginia Serenaders. Therefore, Diamond and Juba followed the protocol used by boxers to prove to the public that their dancing match was authentic and not a minstrel act. Prize fighting was the most popular spectator sport in antebellum America. It developed in England in the early 19th century as an organized interracial sport with rules and regulations enforced by a governing body. However, boxing was banned in most of the United States after a pugilist died in the ring in 1842, forcing the manly art underground. Boxers and challenge dancers emerged from the same, mixed racial working class milieu, and they borrowed idioms and practices from each other, and that lent meaning to the publicity that was surrounding Diamond and Juba's contest. So as in boxing, the match was instigated by an exchange between the two dancers' seconds. That's your promoters or your endorsers. And they do that in the popular press. And in this case, it's the New York Herald. So the original challenge had been made by JSM, the proprietor of the concert saloon where Juba was working, which shared the building that it was in with a boxing gymnasium and a pistol gallery, so kind of close association there. He, JSM, would match the colored boy Juba for $100 against any breakdown dancer in the world. Acting as Diamond's second, George B. Wooldridge, who was the former editor of The Whip, here's another journal, and that's a weekly paper that covers boxing and other betting sports. Wooldridge accepted the challenge for Diamond and specified his terms. He says, I will match John Diamond against him, meaning Juba, for $100 in a jig and reel. One judge to be selected by each party, they to select a third. If danced in private, the expenses to be divided. If public, the winner of the match to have all the receipts over actual expenses. JSM accepted Wooldridge's terms the next day, certifying that he was ready to bind the wager for the match to come off within 1 week at any place thereafter agreed upon. Like boxing, challenge dancing required these published challenges in the sporting press. They also shared a lot of idioms with boxing. They socked up their stakes. That was, in boxing, they put the 4 stakes around and ropes, and then the boxing match took place inside. And you would gather your wager in a purse or a sock, and you would hang that on the stake, and that so that you sock up your stakes. So these guys do that too. And then you exhibit your own sweet science. They have a science of boxing, a science of dancing. Boxers and challenge dancers also toe the mark, come up to scratch, and they engage in a bout. And the word bout is again from Irish set dancing, a bauta, which was a short bit of dancing, right? So a bout. So the public acknowledgement then in these 2 ads of how the expenses would be divided, this is another important authenticating detail in the challenge. It differentiates this match from a mere speculation wherein both sides received back their stakes and split the expenses and the profits no matter who won. So they're saying, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to divide it in these particular ways depending on who won. The kinds of speculations where they both got their stakes back and they divided the receipts, those sorts of humbugs were looked down upon by the sporting community, and so they were trying to avoid any idea that that's what they were doing. The preliminaries not only identified the dancers as serious athletes, they solidified jig dancing's classification as a manly art like boxing. As the ad or the original ad suggests, the fame garnered in other forums by these 2 celebrated breakdown dancers enabled their seconds, these 2 guys, to present the match as a championship. Both dancers were known and had been billed as unrivaled champions. Like boxers, any number of dancers could designate themselves champion of a particular neighborhood or a city or even a state. There's no official organization that's going to back their claims. Therefore, says the ad, Diamond and Juba's friends anxiously wished for a public trial to determine which should be called, in typical boxing hyperbole, champion dancer of the world, right? Love it. This time, it is, they say, the time to decide has come. Diamond and Juba could not actually have competed at this level, a championship level, unless they had a shared practice, a Black Irish practice. The popular press offered no post-match coverage of the 1844 contest, but Juba's subsequent playbills and advertisements claimed that he had pocketed the wager. And you can see that here. He says he's danced John Diamond at the Chatham Theater and at the Bowery Amphitheater. He's won the money. He is now the wonder of the world. This lacuna, the fact that the match, the results were not published, has led some scholars to speculate that the editor of the New York Herald was just too racist to print the result. Other people take it to mean that all dancing matches were simply fakes. But the outcome of a dancing match was rarely reported unless the result was disputed. That the African American dancer won the match, and no one challenged the decision or even batted an eye when he dubs himself the king of all dancers, can only be explained by the origins and practice of challenge dancing in lower class Black Irish communities. The historical significance of Diamond and Juba's great public contest lies in its challenge to our preconceptions. If you didn't know this history, you might think that race riots, job competition, and minstrelsy's racist stereotyping characterized the totality of relationships between Black and Irish men in the antebellum era. Or you might think that Kitty O'Neill here or Julia Morgan was just copying the men when she publicly challenged Hank Mason, E. Bowers, or any other man or female in the country to dance a match for a $500 stake. You might even scoff at the idea that dancing could be judged an actual sport. But those assumptions would not be based on this contest's historical context. They simply reiterate ingrained prejudices that deny African Americans the agency of appropriation, that assign women's history to a secondary status, and that privilege games propelled by antagonistic masculinity over those that rely on cooperation. So I will conclude by telling you why we don't know really about these contests. In the 1850s, to attract white middle class audiences, blackface minstrels renovated their theaters into plush palaces and made their skits more crudely racist to identify themselves as observers of, rather than participants in, Negro culture. At the same time, political debates and the fugitive slave law made it dangerous for Black performers and spectators to appear in public. With fewer knowledgeable jig dancers in the audience, people who could understand and relish the challenge dancing's mixed heritage, its techniques, people who, if you don't have people in the audience who know that, anything could be passed off as Negro jig dancing or as challenge dancing. So competitive jig dancers moved to the amateur sports world, where immigrant Irish and African Americans still figured prominently. In 1857, a blackface skit, and this is a picture of part of the dancing in that skit. A blackface skit entitled "Challenge Dance" reflects these changes that happened throughout the 1850s. Performed by two white male minstrel dancers, the sketch was a send-up of challenge dancing's Black Irish origins. This is part of what it says. Ill Count McGinnis, a Hibernian darky, is headed to a local ball where a silver cup will be awarded to the best dancer. When he meets Farmyard Sam, an Ethiopian exquisite, who challenges him to a match for $10 a side. McGinnis accepts, and they dance a wild extravaganza. Appealing to a middle-class audience, this blackface act maliciously lampooned the exchange and competition that lay behind Irish Diamond and Black Juba's grand public contest of 1844. But it also unwittingly acknowledged that such interracial partnerships had occurred in the past. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Dr. Masten, for that fascinating talk. Maybe we can stop
I'll stop the share.
sharing screen.
Can you do
and
that? Or shall I do it?
Let's see, I might even be able, there we go. Wonderful. So we have a small group with us this afternoon, and And questions are welcome. You can enter them into the Q&A, but it will be easy to unmute and talk if anyone who is attending has questions. I had a question to start out while others think about responses, if they have any. Um, I was really enjoying the way that this research takes place at the boundary between sports history and art history,
Mm.
or performing arts history, I should say, or dance history.
Mhm.
Um, and I wondered if our there's an understanding of the in the scholarship on the development of the minstrel show that, as you're suggesting, in the earlier decades, as it's beginning in the 1820s and 30s and even into the 1840s, there is a more participatory environment. There's a more um, uh, it hasn't uh, sort of turned into this more rigid caricature, a more racist caricature, as you suggest in the 1850s. Do you think that the sports history side of this that you outlined, the way that challenge dancing was kind of as close to boxing and prize fighting as it was to stage performance and the kind of commercialization and spectacle of Barnum and other theatrical presenters, do you think that that sports history side of it um, has something to tell us about politics of race in 19th century America? How does that sports side fit with some of these larger dynamics of, let's say, the development of more rigid racial categories and racism
Mm.
in this period? And as a little kind of side note to that question, I wondered where Tom Rice's Jim Crow character
Mm.
fits into all of this as another kind of entry point into the story.
Mm. Well, that's a lot of questions.
Sorry.
um, let's see. The first one was about sport. Oh, okay. So sports is very significant to racial politics because sports is one of those areas that's never respectable, really. It's never respectable. And so it's okay to continue to have cross-racial, relationships in it. Not only do you have, I mean, the boxing is really significant. The first two American boxers to box in England are both African American. Um, and then if you look at pictures of the boxing fancy there, it's always mixed race. In the fancy being all the fans that are watching, and then of course there are some black boxers too, but there were also black boxers in America. So that was one of the realms where it was okay. But you can also see that in other sports. I mean, horse racing, a lot of the jockeys were slaves, the slaves of horse owners, and the grooms, and also some of the pedestrian races, things like that. Different sports, they're just more. It was all right for the two to cross, and partly it's interesting because it's both. I'm really interested in the class dynamic too, and in this case, it's a lower. If you are engaging in the sport, you're lower class. It doesn't matter how much money you make; you are a lower class or a working class. But in the fancy in these at these contests are all kinds of middle class people, middle class men in particular, who like to gamble. Really, gambling and speculation, all that is so significant to this moment. And the thing about, I mean, I like this particular contest and this big ad for it and everything, because they are really trying to distinguish it. They want to show it is a sport. We are doing a sport, and that's really hard after P.T. Barnum had taken both of these boys and made them dance fake challenges. So they had to reestablish themselves in the sporting world. They're always in the sporting world too, but they have to reestablish themselves in terms of sort of the larger public as sportsmen. And also, when like after later on, when they're both they do several more challenges and they part ways, they like John Diamond, the Irish one, he identifies himself as an artist athlete. And so he's always thinking of his art form is a competitive kind of art form. So that's another part where it's, class, race, both of those are significant there. And also, and I think it's the political side of class too, that racial politics really determines class. And so that's a hard one. And your other question was,
I was curious about is it Thomas Dartmouth Rice's
oh yeah,
Jim
yes.
Crow figure, and how you think of that as relating to these larger traditions of cross, let's say African Irish
Mhm.
breakdown and jigs. I mean, how does this world that you've portrayed here relate to the emergence of that figure from the docks of Cincinnati, wheeling about and jumping Jim Crow? I mean, how are these two in dialogue with each other?
Well, Jim Crow, of course, T.D. Rice starts much earlier. We don't get the minstrel troupe until 1843. So before that, you have blackface performance, but it's a different kind of blackface performance. And he's interesting because people who write about dance at the time in the 1840s and 50s and so on, they say that he was not a dancer. And so how he does one kind of dance, they call these different kinds of Negro dancing. They have different kinds, but there's the jig dancers and then there's the other Negro dancers, and they call them, oh, I can't remember the term right now, but it's a word that basically says they don't actually know what they're doing, they're just doing it for fun, whereas these other guys are looked at as experts in the field of jig dancing. And so I've got some quotes about that in my book. And when Charlie White is he's a minstrel that opens a melodeon in New York, and Juba, he has Juba actually dance for him, and he stars him in his shows, and he does all kinds of stuff with him. um, but he also invites John Diamond and T.D. Rice to come and dance for him. But John Diamond stays because he is up with the times. T.D. Rice is considered old fashioned by the 1840s, so he gets dropped really fast. So it's, yes, Rice did grow up in these same kind of neighborhoods. He did see these kinds of dances, but he took it and he made it into a theatrical performance where these guys, they can dance for missile troops, they can act in the plays, but generally what they really want to do is dance, and that's what they do. Yeah.
And on your bigger theme, is there a difference between, I guess I want to say, speculation during this time period and spectacularization? I mean, I mean that's a huge question, but I guess I just was so taken by the way you're noticing the the force of commercialization and the market revolution, the way that Barnum and others are starting to take participatory culture of the working classes and transform it into a spectacle of a kind I mean, almost a kind of surveillance even. And how does that go along with this emerging middle class of gamblers who are also dealing with a marketplace that's a world of gambling as well? I mean, I guess I'm asking about these much bigger stakes of this
Mhm.
story, and if you have thoughts about how this fits into this larger historiography of the
Mhm.
market revolution in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, speculation is what drives the market revolution, right? You don't unless people are deciding not to just make what they need for their neighbors and themselves. They go out and they speculate that, oh, I'll make 1,200 candles instead of 100 candles, and I will sell them in the market. That's a speculation. So everything is being, speculation is everywhere. And in fact, I have people making challenges in every realm. I can find, newspaper boys, they make challenges who can fold them the fastest. Uh, um, Carriage builders, we're going to have a challenge over who's going to build the best carriage. And then people use them in advertisements, like they're selling products for female complaints, and they say $500 challenge like that. And so the whole speculative frenzy is just everywhere. And so this just all these performers, and not just the dancers, but a lot of performers challenge each other on the stage as a way to get people to come, because gambling is just so in part of the whole culture. It's the whole society is based on gambling in the Jacksonian era. so you get all kinds of really interesting stuff, like these two violinists that come from Europe, and then they are just, everybody just loves them, and then suddenly they start having these competitions, and then two more violinists come from Europe, and they have four violinists, and they're just playing classical music, and yet they're having these big competitions. So it's just, everybody picked it up, and these guys made they make their own living with it. But people like P.T. Barnum just see this is just a great way to draw an audience. So he starts it before he puts these boys on the stage as dancers. He starts it with jugglers, and he has a juggler that has already put his own like ad up that he could do the best juggling ever. And so Barnum hires him, and then makes a challenge in the ad, and then there's another juggler that happens to be sitting in the audience that hisses and says you're not the best, and then Barnum makes a little deal with them to put them on the stage, and they're not going to make the big $1,000 stakes, but they are going to make a wage for doing it. And so this wages versus wagers is a big part of the theme that's going on here. And so for working classes, it matters to them whether it's a wage or a wager. A wager is, gives them prestige, not just money. And so, there's a big difference. And you see that, like, other challenge dancers turning down, they take a challenge because it's for a gold watch, and then they say quietly somewhere else that they turns out the guy just wanted to give me $10, and I said no, and they won't do it. So it's about, all about prestige, and it's about making a living. You can't really make a living. Well, both, not Juba, but Diamond becomes an indentured servant basically of P.T. Barnum, and he's given like $12 a month to dance 2 or 3 times a day for him. And so when he does a challenge on stage, it's really, he knows he's being ripped off, and so he runs away several times, trying to get so that he can do it himself, and he eventually is able to, but yeah.
It seems like the challenge culture is a different lineage, a different story than the Barnum we think of as the trickster who's offering these spectacle, the Ripley's Believe It or Not kind of spectacles of this is Joyce Heth as
Mhm.
kind of the, could this really be George Washington's wet nurse, or the Fiji mermaid? I mean, the challenge culture is a different kind of
I would
dynamic.
no, I think it's not. I mean, Barnum is using it to do the same thing as he does with the Fiji, mermaid.
Ah,
He's putting up fake. They call them gag challenges, because the challenge itself is, he's the one that's making the challenge in the paper for John Diamond. Like, he'll make the challenge, and then John Diamond gets accepted by some other guy, and then they dance on the stage, and who makes the money is Barnum, not them. So it's all the same kind of, make a spectacle out of something that people are interested in and see what you can make. And
mm,
there was a big, another term was the extravaganza. And extravaganza is, we think of it as a big show with lots of dancers and musicians and all that, but it started out, it was, extravaganza meant that you were dancing and singing and playing an instrument or something like that, or it was an instrument player and a singer and then his dancer. And so those extravaganza dances were kind of a challenge too. So then someone else would say, let's, two extravaganza dancers might come together and do that. So the kind of creating spectacle out of everything that people are just doing for fun, you know, out on the street or in the tavern or at home. That, I mean, that is what, I don't, Barnum goes all over the place, but he's always doing the same thing. He says that, you know, speculation in entertainment is no different than speculation in any other business. He says
mm.
things like that, and he means it. And so he speculates in these two boy dancers, and they help him a little bit. And then when they don't help him anymore, then he goes on to something else. Well, what he
And
does go on to is gets fake dancers, gets fake diamonds to dance for him.
right, the
Fake dancers.
gag, the gag is much more important than the than this focus in what you're studying on the authenticity of of the challenge.
Well, and again, it's who are you looking at? From whose perspective? From the working class or the middle class? Because P.T. Barnum says in his autobiography that the audience knew that I'm making this up. The audience knows this isn't real and they don't mind as long as they're entertained. But that wasn't actually true of people that came to watch challenge dancing. If it wasn't good dancing, people booed and hissed and threw things onto the stage. So it was just different because it was their culture. So if he could do a really good match, he gets two good dancers on the stage, they're satisfied. It doesn't matter if it's a real match because they can decide for themselves who wins. And so,
Mm.
if he gets, and what he does when he takes Diamond down to New Orleans is he gets just some supernumerary, somebody who can't really dance to go against him. And then that's kind of upsets people. And that upsets Diamond. And so he runs away. But yeah, but as long as he has a good dancer dancing with him, then people are happy and satisfied. So it's not
And
the
it
same as what he thinks. He thinks it's that, oh, they don't care if they're being, what humbugged. They don't care. But in fact, it just depends on the situation whether they care or not.
and as you say, this emerging difference between a working class perception and a middle class,
Mhm.
emerging kind of middle class perception.
Mhm.
Well, a last question then, and a typical question that historians are always getting asked, which is, as you've worked on this research and you're moving toward the kind of the completion of this book, where do you see the significance and legacies of this raucous culture today? I mean, I think there's certainly a historical lesson that we're learning about being careful not to map back onto this time period some of the assumptions about appropriation and agency that have emerged as more predominantly now. But are there other ways that you see this history mattering today, relevant today to how we want to think about American culture in contemporary times?
Well, I do see a legacy. These two dancers leave quite a legacy, and I think it matters a lot. I think whenever you see young people, different races, different genders, coming together to dance or to compete in their dancing, like they do in like breakdown dancing and hip hop ciphers and even Irish step dancing contests. These people from all over the world want to come and do these. Well, and what do? Is they create these communities, right? These communities of dancers. And so just the fact that we had a black and an Irish guy that actually came together to do these competitions, and not just once, but like 3 or 4 times, that was really significant. It's saying that there is a community, that dance is a place you can build community. It is. It's a place. If you, and I have like that picture that I had of the man and woman dancing in the tavern. Um, that's a picture of the saying how look how ugly and vulgar that woman is. But if you look at the picture, she's got dancing shoes on. She's purchased shoes for her feet, which suggests that she knows what matters is who can dance. And so you go into a mixed race pub, you look for the best dancer, not the person that's the same color as you. You look for the best dancer, and that happens all over the world still. So that's one of the legacies, I'd say, of challenge dancing itself. And Diamond and Juba too, in some ways, if you think of, again, in terms of just dance itself, would be look at all the duos that we get in tap dancing, and the way you get on the vaudeville stage, you have white tap dancers dancing with black tap dancers. Again, I guess I'd say it's that dancing itself is really unusual in that way, that it's a physical thing, and yet it's people do it with people we wouldn't think they would do it with. So that's in the dance realm. I think in the other realms, I'm suggesting that we pay too much. I mean, we had to pay attention to the terrible things that are done to people, Irish and African Americans. But if we only look at it from that angle, we're looking from the top down, and we don't see what did people do with what was done to them. That's the old Herb Gutman phrase. What did people do with what was done to them? And that's what I'm seeing here is all these people doing things with what was done to them and really doing things that are incredible, just incredible and wonderful.
I'm reminded of the traces of this you would see in swing dancing or hip hop in the cipher of hip hop dancing, and wonderful to bring us back to Gutman's insistence that we honor people who have been under the weight of various kinds of oppressions, that we honor their agency and their ability to move, as it were, under that.
Mhm.
So, well, I want to thank you, Dr. Masten, for being the archest wag of our gathering, and
Thank you.
you've won the challenge, and we're looking forward to posting this for others to view and think about, and we wish you all the best with the publication of the book,
you.
and onward from there. And thank you so much for presenting today.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I was
Okay,
very honored.
thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, we'll be back. We'll be back in February with SUNY History Lab, and we look forward to seeing people then.
Thank you so much.